Hello neighbor, I'm Robert Burns, and we have started off the year 2017, and I realized that it was only a few short days ago that I came to you and brought the feature that we did with regard to First Guarantee Bank and their vigorous defense with regard to wire transfer fraud losses alleged by John Bell Edwards' auction board appointee, Jeff Henderson. Now I want to emphasize something. The feature that I'm bringing to you today is completely and totally separate and distinct from that. So I don't want anybody to think that there's this merging. This is how many lawsuits are going on involving fraud entailing Jeff Henderson and his father, Marvin Henderson, the founder of Henderson Auctions. And so we're going to talk today about a ruling that was made by a federal judge, specifically Judge Shelly Dick. She issued her ruling today, January the 4th of 2017. And let me just say this, I was a former fraud investigator, as I relayed in the previous video, for the FDIC in the early 90s. And I don't believe I've ever seen a ruling by a judge which is this scathing in terms of its assessment of the alleged fraudulent activity on the part of Marvin Henderson. Now, we're going to give you a link to the entirety of Judge Shelly Dick's ruling, and it's a 16-page ruling. What I would really encourage you to do is to just focus on the first 4.5 pages, because she did an outstanding job of presenting the factual backgrounds of this whole case. And I'm just going to hit the high points of that 4.5 pages, and then we're going to skip to the final 2 pages of her ruling. Most of what's in between is a lot of legalese of arguing court cases, things of that nature. You're welcome to read it. But you may find it a little bit, I don't want to say snooze fest, but the crux elements here are in the first 4.5 pages, where she provides the factual background, and then the final 2 pages. So let me just say this, giving you a little background for those of you who have not looked at previous video that we have had with regard to this particular situation. There was some years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, Marvin Henderson and a gentleman named James Blake Everett entered into a joint venture to acquire a casino barge, specifically the Crown Casino, and they were to auction it and split the profits. Now, as Judge Dick spells out given the factual background, the purchase price of the casino, the floating casino, was $600,000, and there were approximately $300,000 in expenses incurred to moor the boat, get it ready for resale. Now, Judge Dick did not allude to this in her 4.5 pages of the factual background. However, there was an attempt to auction this boat, and the auction was a flop. And so what had to happen is they wanted to go into negotiated sale mode, and they found a gentleman who was willing to buy the vessel, and the consideration that he gave for the vessel. Now, I'm going to give you 2 different figures here, but just bear with me. The official figures that were put into the initial lawsuit were that he gave $350,000 plus title to a property called the Ivy House in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. So and we're going to put the numbers up for you. We previously had put the $600,000 and the $300,000, giving you $900,000 in the boat. Now what they got, bear in mind, there's two figures here, and I want to explain that in a minute. $350,000 plus title to the Ivy House in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Now, the $350,000 got wired to Henderson Auctions. All right. It turns out there was actually, the transaction was for $461,000, well actually $450, and then there was a $10,000 offset. But basically, there was $110,000 that was wired to Marvin Henderson personally. I'm talking about to him individually, as a part of this transaction. Now, Marvin signed all the documents. He signed the transfer of the vessel. He represented himself as having full authority for Henderson Auctions, because anybody who knows anything about Henderson Auctions knows that it literally is Marvin Henderson, and he's never backed away or shied away from that until recently, that is. But at any rate, there was, the actual purchase price was $450,000, and so there was this $110,000 difference, including that $10,000 offset that I mentioned to you. And Blake was to receive a Mr. Everett was to receive $50,000. He's referred to as Blake in the pleading, so I frequently would do that as well. Was to receive $50,000 commission on this. And Mr. Everett contends that not only did he wire Mr. Henderson the 110, but also the 50 that he had foregone in the commission, as well as another $50,000. Marvin Henderson apparently was in need of some money at that particular time, and so approximately $200,000 got wired to Marvin Henderson. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Henderson did not inform his daughter of this fact, Janet Cagley. She apparently was in the dark about the separate wire transfer that went to her father, and so she was contending that, hey, Mr. Everett, you still owe us a bunch of money. We want you to put the title to the Ivy House, which had previously been put into an LLC exclusively controlled by Mr. Everett. We want you to transfer that to JAH Enterprises, which is the DBA name for Henderson Auctions. Mr. Everett said, no, I don't believe I'm going to be doing that, because you owe me about $500,000, and we're going to give you the spreadsheet that outlines exactly the components. I believe it may be $600,000 that Mr. Everett asserts that he is actually owed by Henderson Auctions. So he said, no, I won't be placing this. I'm not going to be transferring this to JAH Enterprises. And so he retained a gentleman named Nick Clark in Mississippi to attempt to auction the Ivy House. And when Janet Cagley and her brother Jeff Henderson found out about this, they were none too pleased, so they filed litigation, temporary restraining order to halt the sale. Then also litigation was filed here in Livingston Parish in 21st Judicial District Court. It dragged on for quite some time, but when Mr. Everett responded to this, his attorney said, oh no, there ain't no way in hell that we're going to play this game on your home turf of Livingston Parish. And so it transferred it over to the federal court in the Middle District of Louisiana, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And that was a very smart move. And let me just say this, as you will see in the ruling that Judge Dick issued today, you're in a little bit different league here. You don't have the pissant puppets that serve on the auctioneer's licensing board making the decision. Now, you've now got a federal judge, and you're going to see from the wording that we're going to give you on her last 2 pages that she sees right through exactly what all happened here. Now, we talked about the fact that $200,000 got wired to Marvin Henderson. Well, his kids were unaware of this at the time that they filed the lawsuit. All right, that fact got divulged after the fact, after they had initiated the lawsuit, and there came the biggest bombshell of this whole thing, is that you want to accuse me, talking about Mr. Everett, of retaining the funds. I didn't retain a damn thing. The money was wired to your father, okay? And so that left them in a hell of a mess, because here they stormed into court, you know, claiming that, okay, you withheld this and so forth, and tried to auction off the Ivy House. You were going to keep all the proceeds, you know, and lo and behold, it was Daddy that got that money. Posed a little bit of a problem for them, so they had to modify their entire lawsuit. And in that, they had Marvin Henderson sign an affidavit saying that he was neither an officer nor a shareholder of JAH Enterprises, which was kind of ironic given that he was put on prominent display on their website as being the chief executive officer of Henderson Auctions, and gave every impression that he had all the authority to negotiate on their behalf. In fact, Mr. Everett says there was never a single instance in which Mr. Henderson, talking about Marvin that is, was not the one that was there doing the negotiating, and he was calling all the shots. So at that point, basically Marvin Henderson got sued personally in the matter. And said, oh, you know, Mr. Everett and his legal team said, oh, no, you're not going to run around like this, you know, and say you've got the authority. It calls us to believe you do have the authority. How in the hell am I supposed to know you don't have the authority? You made every representation that you had the authority, okay? Now you want to conveniently say that, oh, I'm not an officer or a director of JAH Enterprises, you know, and that's what they've actually presented, okay? Because they weren't running into court without half the facts, and now they're in a quagmire, okay? So they basically have to say, well, you shouldn't have wired this money to our daddy, okay? Because he doesn't have anything to do with Henderson Auctions, all right? And so that'll give you the background. As I said, it was initially filed in Livingston Parish. It was transferred into federal court. And basically, Marvin had to retain a separate attorney because his interests are no longer in alignment with his own kids. And so he had to have a separate attorney, and the attorney said, oh, we need to be released from this litigation. You know, big and bold going in there filing it, and now all of a sudden, since you've been named third-party defendant, which would basically mean Jeff Henderson is essentially suing his own father, but what is in the actuality being said is that, you know, okay, if you want to say I'm liable for damages, meaning to Jeff Henderson and Janet Cagley, well, then your father would have to be named as a defendant as well, and he would be liable because he actually got $200,000 of all this money that you were so convinced that I retained. And so Marvin retained an attorney after he finally got sued. They had to hire a private process server to get Marvin Henderson sued. But once he has finally gotten sued, his attorney filed for a motion to dismiss him from the litigation, saying basically that Mr. Everett and his legal team had not adequately demonstrated that Marvin had in fact perpetrated fraud on Mr. Everett. And that brings us to the last 2 pages of Shelly Dick's ruling, because that's what I want to focus on. That's the first link we're going to give you, is the last 2 pages of her ruling. I have certain words highlighted, and I'm going to read them at this time. First of all, we're talking about under the caption of fraud. And she says, having found that it's BLH is Blake's holding company, having found that BLH has adequately pled fraud by alleging the who, what, where, when, and why, the court rejects Henderson's motion to dismiss the fraud claim. Now, whenever in journalism, they teach you need to cover the 5 W's and the H of journalism: who, what, where, when, why. And in journalism, there's also the how. Clearly, in discussing about this fraud, Judge Dick is saying the same thing that applies in a newspaper article applies in court. We need to talk about the who, what, where, when, and why. The how apparently doesn't carry as it did in journalism. We always called it the 5 W's and the H. So Judge Dick goes out of her way to say, and I'm quoting now at the bottom of that next to last page, considering the allegations pled, the court fails to see how BLH has not sufficiently stated a claim for fraud. Now, obviously, that's a double negative, and what that basically says is we see that they have sufficiently stated a claim for fraud. Okay? Next sentence is precious. She answers the question about all these who, what, where, when, and why. The who is clearly Marvin Henderson. The what is clearly the renegotiation of the terms of the contract regarding the casino vessel and the Ivy House. The when is the times that Henderson negotiated on behalf of JAH and allegedly signed documents to this effect. The when is also alleged to be April 11th, 2016, when Henderson, that being Marvin, declared that he was not a shareholder or officer of JAH, although he had acted as such on several occasions with BLH. The where are the places where these negotiations allegedly took place, and he allegedly signed the documents. The why, this one's precious too, the why is that Henderson perpetrated this fraud to personally benefit himself. She also goes on to say that the court finds it disingenuous, Henderson's auctions, that any tea leaves have to be read, and I'm quoting, when it is clear that the claims brought against him, when the allegations are clear. Therefore, the court finds that BLH has stated a plausible claim for relief with adequate particularity, and Marvin Henderson's motion to dismiss the fraud claim is denied. All right, so that'll bring you up to the latest developments with regard to that particular fraud litigation. I want to again emphasize that this is an appointee, Jeff Henderson that is, of Governor John Bell Honor Code Edwards. And I'm just going to say this. This segment is going to serve as the lead-in for our next feature. And that is some of the things that took place behind the scenes in the ouster of Reverend Freddie Lee Phillips from the Auctioneers Licensing Board. You are going to see this element, the Hendersons, strongly behind the scenes. There's one thing I've learned about auctioneers. They can't keep their mouths shut, and they can't resist the temptation to brag, okay? So this will have been the lead-in. The powers that be, if you will, that would be the Marvin Hendersons of the auction industry, and there'll be some other names that we'll be providing you with. They went to work on lobbying John Bell, the Governor Honor Code John Bell Edwards, beginning on April 20th when he named Reverend Freddie Lee Phillips to the Auctioneers Licensing Board. And they worked him hard to remove Reverend Phillips from that board. And I would submit to you the reason is that he is exposing through the LAPA website just this sort of activity. All right? And we're going to give you some little behind the scenes things. I made numerous public records requests to get the documents you're going to see. In one instance, I didn't even have to make a public records request. The auctioneer was so proud of himself that he sent it straight to me. All right? But I got plenty in the way of other public records requests, and you're going to see some very interesting email exchanges between Ellen Parmentier, the head of Governor John Bell Honor Code Edwards Boards and Commissions, and Jacob Warren, the chairman, the newly appointed chairman of the Louisiana Auctioneers Licensing Board. It's a segment you won't want to miss, but I wanted to knock this one out first because I wanted us to make sure we've got an adequate foundation to lay to see just who John Bell Edwards decided to put all of his faith and trust in and would toss Freddie Phillips out on the street in a matter of 20 days. You're starting to see why, but we'll give you some more added detail in just a few days. Thank you so much. I hope your new year has gotten off to a great start. And hold on to your seatbelts. We've got some more interesting features to be coming in coming days. Thank you so much.